This is the intro. So last night I watched Christopher Nolan's adaptation of The Odyssey, and I've got a lot of thoughts. I've been a fan of Christopher Nolan's work for ages, ever since I first watched Batman Begins and The Dark Knight when I was a young boy, and I went into those films as a Batman fan, and I came out completely blown away by the meticulous way Nolan was able to craft this larger-than-life comic book character into a grounded and believable person. Like, I know I was about 10 years old or so when I first saw those films, but they really made me feel like Batman was real. Christopher Nolan has had an unbelievable career overall, and things like The Dark Knight and Batman Begins were just the beginning of my own journey with his work. And now it feels like everything has been building to this moment, to his adaptation of one of the oldest and most iconic stories in human history, shot entirely on IMAX with an all-star cast and crew behind it. Now, there has been a lot of discussion and controversy in the build-up to The Odyssey, some of which I think is constructive and interesting, and others that are just blindly idiotic and just flat-out racist. Look, I would be lying if I said that I wasn't interested in a version of The Odyssey that was more historically accurate and honoured the culture and the country that it was set in. And I think if there's anything to be proven from filmmakers like Robert Eggers, making things as accurate as possible can make for really compelling narratives. But this is the version we've got. It's Christopher Nolan's version of The Odyssey. It's a massive Hollywood blockbuster with A-list stars and effects, and to be honest, when you're watching it, setting aside the American accents and the modern colloquialisms, it's quite easy to sort of get on with the film and then just enjoy the story for what it is. I just feel the need to touch on that before going into the film itself more, because The Odyssey is a gigantic, epic, fantastical story that has likely been crafted through word of mouth numerous times before ever being written down. I mean, it is the story in many ways of answering the call to adventure, returning home, vengeance, war, gods, faith, and it transcends across interpretations and is an extremely malleable narrative that can be Nolan's Odyssey one moment, an epic musical another, or even a Coen Brothers comedy the next. That's perhaps the most fascinating and engaging aspect of Nolan's version of The Odyssey, the idea of how stories are told and how they can become cemented and ingratiated within one another and define who we are. Christopher Nolan's love of non-linear narratives returns here to brilliant effect as he weaves between Odysseus' son Telemachus and his wife Penelope dealing with the absence of their king while cutting to Odysseus' various adventures overseas. It embraces a fragmented style of storytelling reminiscent of memories reforming pertinent to Odysseus having to confront his various mistakes, but it also plays an effective role in building the suspense and anticipation of Odysseus' return as other characters reflect on their time with him. It all begins to quite brilliantly weave together an organic method of storytelling that is directly reminiscent of how this story would have been told back in its day, where word of mouth, speculation and rumour help form dinner table stories into legends. I mean, if there's any sort of historical accuracy to give the film credit for, it should be for the narrative structure and the form of the story itself. The construction of the narrative is certainly one of the film's biggest strengths, and I must give editor Jennifer Lane credit for making a gargantuan epic feel so tightly composed. She has an incredible eye for detail and is particularly great at allowing the flows of cuts to immerse you within the minds of the characters themselves. I will caveat by saying that I think the first 20 minutes of the film are a little rough, and sure, there's some important contextualization that is essential for the story, but it just feels a little rushed and messy to me while I was watching. That is until the film plunges us into the depths of the Cyclops' cave. At that point, it just begins to take flight and soars from there right to the finish line. A quick point there too about practical effects, which there is clearly plenty of, but let's please stop with the Christopher Nolan doesn't use CGI rhetoric, because it's just not true. There are clear as day digital compositing and computer-generated effects used throughout this film, and there is nothing wrong with that. That's not to discredit the practical elements of The Odyssey or the clever camera trickery. It just irritates me when everything made by Nolan is pushed as being fully in camera and nothing else, and then it becomes this needless CGI versus practical effects debate, as if, trying to prove this is why one is better than the other. I mean, if you've seen any of Corridor Crew videos, you know that the answer is both are equally great when done right, and they work even better when they work together. Anyway, I'm sort of nitpicking at this point. The visuals are pretty great overall, and as mentioned previously, the Cyclops scene is a real standout for me across the entire film, and it utilises some incredible lighting and composition to make the scene feel imposing and dread-inducing. But it's not the only time that horror is explored in the film, and there's another moment that is pure, unadulterated body horror, which makes for a truly alarming and quite upsetting scene if you're not prepared for it. The horror then becomes more existential as the film goes along, with a depiction depiction of the undead emerging from the blackened gravel and brimstone of Hades being a deeply compelling reflection of Odysseus' grief and regrets. I've got a lot more I want to say about the horror and the themes of the Odyssey, which I'll circle back round to at the end, but perhaps I'll take the opportunity to touch on the performances for a moment. The cast overall is absolutely stacked, and one surprising scene stealer for me was in the aforementioned depiction of hell, where Elliot Page delivers a chilling and impassioned monologue, which really struck me. I can't say I've ever felt Elliot Page has ever been this commanding of a screen presence before, but here, he just really delivers a heartbreaking, fractured, broken performance that perfectly complements the direness of the scene. It's not a spoiler to say that he's not really in the film for very much, but when he is, he really makes an impact. Robert Pattinson is expectedly great and is deliciously snivelling and weird. You can always count on him to play the weird little freaks really well. Anne Hathaway has considerable presence and strength in her performance, and Tom Holland is the essential humanity of the film for me. He so brilliantly captures this transitional point from youth to adulthood and carries the burden of expectation and honour with real commitment and believability. There's also been a lot of discussion at the moment around Samantha Morton's role in the film, and in a similar thing with Elliot Page, quite a small role for the most part, but highly impactful, and I've always been a big fan of Samantha Morton's work, so she's fantastic in this film too, and I'll leave it there. The surprise of who that character is what makes it work so well. Another surprise standout is John Leguizamo, who has a small but extremely important role. If Telemachus is the humanity, then Eumaeus is the heart and soul of the film, and is representative of hope, persistence, and unbreakable will in the face of crushing, overwhelming odds. Finally, and most importantly, we must talk about Matt frickin' Damon. Matt Damon. I instinctively wanted to do that joke, but I bailed last minute. Matt Damon delivers a truly fantastic performance, one which feels appropriately multi-layered and gives him ample opportunity to be highly introspective in how he showcases Odysseus' inner turmoil. He feels empowering and strong and commanding, but he's also incredibly insular and quiet, and there are moments where he faces doubt and denies himself to prove his own agency and command over his fate. It's a brilliant character flaw of his, where his need to control his destiny rather than allow it to take form naturally provokes him to make some very interesting and telling choices. Odysseus is a really interesting character, really difficult character to get right, but Matt Damon just nails it. As I said earlier, the horror of the story starts to become more existential in nature as the film continues, and is particularly relevant to Odysseus confronting the traumas of conflict and war. The consequences of war and the inevitably tragic fallout was one of the biggest themes of Nolan's previous film, Oppenheimer, a highly self-reflective and psychological look into the mind of a man who feels as if he has blood on his hands. The Odyssey takes us further in the most literal sense, as well as metaphorically speaking. The film clearly looks to examine PTSD with Odysseus' journey, and how the conflicts he actively puts himself in ultimately haunt him for the foreseeable future. His life is forever changed due to the other lives that he is so willing to sacrifice in service of his own needs, and it makes for a truly tragic and horrifying revelation toward the end. But as with much of Nolan's past work, the cerebral nature of his concepts and narratives often give way to emotional and deeply human themes of love, sometimes coming off a little clunky and preachy in the past, but here it feels incredibly effective and emotionally resonant, and does a superb job at rounding out the harsh edges of the tale into something grounded and sincere. Through the ashes and blood of war comes an idea of being better, of owning up to mistakes and finding your way home to prove that, despite all you've been through and all you've wronged, there's a brighter tomorrow on the horizon. So that's what I thought about the Odyssey. Not a conventional review by any means, and to be honest, I don't often do these sorts of videos, but I just had too much on my mind with this film, and I wanted to chat and get it out there, splurge a little bit. There's only so much I can sort of yap at my partner's ear after watching a film and, you know, drive her to insanity, so the next best thing is I can yap at you guys. I think it's a fantastic film overall. It's really, really entertaining. Is it Nolan's best film? No, certainly not. I think it's unlikely to ever reach the level of perfection of The Dark Knight or Oppenheimer, and I would struggle to see it toppling Dunkirk's technical prowess or Interstellar's emotion, but it is absolutely a display of so many talented people operating at the highest levels of talent and creativity from all departments. From the art department, to the sets, to the costumes, to the special effects, to the, oh my god, I haven't even talked about Ludwig Göransson's score. Brilliant stuff, as always. There's not too much to say there. You can expect an absolutely incredible score from Ludwig Göransson. What did you think about the Odyssey? What did you think about the Odyssey? That bit always feels a bit weird. What do you think about the Odyssey? Please do leave a comment if you fancy it, and if you haven't seen the film, then I really encourage you to get out there, because it's absolutely worth seeing on the big screen. Thank you very much for watching this video. Really, really appreciate it. Hopefully going to get some more stuff out there within the foreseeable future. We'll see how this goes. Keep watching films, and much love.